We've already seen cases of ballot box stuffing. We're going to see manipulation of the electronic voting, which is a new element of that. Because when it comes down to it, again, basically the Kremlin is not only the organization that runs the election, it's the organization that counts the votes. So although they would like the elections to look faintly plausible, the bottom line is that in some ways the actual vote is, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but of secondary importance.
It's the final day of voting in Russia's presidential election, and the turnout has exceeded 55%, according to the country's Central Election Commission. But the Sunday Times today suggests the only real question is the scale of the landslide victory President Putin will, well, win, in inverted commas. The paper's analysis is written by Professor Mark Galeotti, an honorary professor at University College London and author of many books on Russia, including Putin's Wars. Mark, good morning.
Good morning.
So something of a foregone conclusion, perhaps, in all of this. One thing I'm keen to get at with you is how Putin keeps sort of declaring victory in elections. There must be some level of support for him. What is that, and how does he seemingly top it up in order to maintain power?
The strange thing about this is, in some ways, there are two Putins. Look, remember, this is a man who's been in charge of the country, directly and indirectly, for 24 years now. And so in some ways, there's Putin, the icon, the avatar of the country. And then there's Putin, the actual flesh and blood politician. And the interesting thing is we see his approval ratings can often be bouncing up even as far as the 80%, the kind of level that any Western politician would happily sell their own grandmother for. But his trust ratings are often in the 30%. Now, that seems strange. Why would people approve of someone they don't trust? But in some ways, basically, the approval ratings show people just simply feeling that saying that they approve of Putin is like being a patriot. It's like saying you approve of your country. Whereas the trust ratings reflect what they actually think of Putin, the person. So there's all kinds of ways in which the Kremlin manipulates the results, and we can talk about those. But there is also that almost bedrock sense that given that Putin has been in power for so long, people have almost come to equate him with the country.
What then of the manipulation of election results, Mark? What can you explain to us about, what is happening right now on day 3 of the election, and what will happen between now and a sort of formal declaration? What is that manipulation that we speak of?
Well, there's two stages in a way. There's obviously the manipulation of the vote, but there's also a lot of what we could think of as pre-rigging beforehand. I mean, for example, you make damn sure that there's no credible alternative candidates on the ballot. And maybe unfairly, but in my piece for today's Sunday Times, I described the rest of the candidates as a serial groper, an aging communist, and a youthful opportunist. I mean, basically, the idea is these are political pygmies to make Putin look statesmanlike. There's also the classic tactic of basically offering sweeteners to all sorts of different parts of the electorate, which Putin did very successfully in his recent State of the Union message, to try and basically get people thinking, well, I'll just hold my nose and vote for Putin because he's promising us more benefits and the like. But then actually on the day, or days in this case, we've already seen cases of ballot box stuffing. We're going to see manipulation of the electronic voting, which is a new element of that. Because when it comes down to it, again, basically the Kremlin is not only the organization that runs the election, it's the organization that counts the votes. So although they would like the elections to look faintly plausible, the bottom line is that in some ways the actual vote is, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but of secondary importance.
What then, Mark, and this is something that your article speaks to as well, what can we sort of project forward about this new term for Putin? And perhaps, is there anything we can learn from the evolution of the Putin regime, i.e. how he may have changed since he became interim president back in 1999? What has evolved since then that might help us understand what we can look to for his next term?
Yeah, I mean, look, overall, over the years, Putin, like so many authoritarian leaders, has in a way become more himself. He's become something of a caricature of the Putin back in 2000. You know, he was always quite skeptical of democracy, paranoid and such like, and now we see that brought to the nth degree. Obviously, the election in and of itself is not going to change a dramatic amount, though it may lead to a reshuffle in cabinet, because technically speaking, everyone in the cabinet submits their resignation before the actual changeover of power. It's more that what we can do is use the election as a way of spotting the processes, the deeper processes that are taking place anyway. We're seeing, for example, Putin begin to try and cultivate a new, younger elite to try and sort of bypass the big beasts of the system around him, because he knows that many of them are quite skeptical about the war and about his leadership. We can also see the increasingly brazen attempts to just simply rig the result of the vote as a symptom of this slide into rather sort of shabby banana republic police state that his Russia is becoming. And in so many ways, what Putin is actually doing, without I think intending to, is replicating the old Soviet Union, the shabby slide into stagnation under an increasingly aging authoritarian regime. So I think what we actually can do is see this election as a symptom of the deeper processes.
Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте. Это у меня. А у вас какая? Ёшинская. Ёшинская. Это ко мне. Вот. На улицу точку. Куда он прется? Николай я паспорт даю, вот это записывайте, потом. Ну весь процесс только не пишите. Ни у одного. Даже она не поет. Ну, сейчас тогда может не поехать. А? Сейчас плюс 6. Так и получилось. Ну что, пойдем? Да, сейчас команды не было.
We've only scratched the surface. Let me tell you, I was reading Mark's piece actually this morning in the office, and I was gripped, such that I couldn't concentrate on anything else. People were speaking to me, I was ignoring them. Have a little read of Mark Galeotti.
You're going to have to be reading Galeotti for that, do you?
Have a read of Mark Galeotti in the Sunday Times today for the full deep dive on what happens next on day 3 of 3 in the Russian election. The result is probably something of a foregone conclusion. So what does it all mean? Mark goes into great detail. You can get that with your digital subscription. Online, go to sundaytimes.co.uk or download the app.